Easy now, come here.
My
That's it,
God.
good boy. We're friends now.
An old man fell to his knees in the dirt, not because he tripped, not because he had a heart attack or collapsed from pain. Thomas Whitfield fell to his knees because of a horse, a small, thin, brown horse that nobody wanted, a horse so ordinary that 300 people had walked past it that morning without stopping, a horse that an auctioneer was about to sell for less money than a new car tire costs. But Thomas could not move. He could not breathe. He could not do anything except kneel in that dirt and cry. This happened on a Saturday morning in the middle of October. It happened at Chen's livestock auction, in a place that smelled like hay and old wood, and the sadness that comes when people do not want their animals anymore. The auction grounds were busy that day. People were buying and selling cattle. People were looking at young horses they wanted to train or breed. People were doing normal auction business, the kind of work that happens every single week in hundreds of places across the country. Nobody was expecting anything strange to happen. Nobody was expecting anything at all except maybe a good deal or a good bargain. Then the small brown foal came into the sale ring. The foal was young, maybe 4 months old. It had bones showing through its coat. It had dirty hooves and a mane that looked like it had never been brushed. The foal stood in the middle of the sale ring and looked around at all the people with dark, careful eyes. Those eyes were the only thing about the foal that looked alive. Everything else looked tired and sad and like the foal had seen things that young horses should never see. An auctioneer named Robert looked at the foal and felt something in his stomach. He had been running this auction for 23 years. He had sold 10,000 horses in that time. He could usually tell which horses would sell and which ones would not. He could look at an animal for 2 seconds and know what kind of price it would bring. But this foal was different. The foal was so thin, so plain, so forgettable, that Robert knew it would barely bring any money at all. People at auctions do not usually spend good money on a horse that looks like it has been neglected. They want horses that look healthy and strong and worth something. Robert started the bidding at $300. Nobody raised their hand. He lowered it to $200. Still, nobody. He lowered it to $100, and still the room stayed quiet. People were looking at their shoes or looking at other pens or looking anywhere except at the small brown foal standing alone in the sale ring. The foal did not move. The foal did not make any noise. The foal just stood there and waited, like it knew that nobody wanted it, and it had made peace with that fact a long time ago. Robert was about to call the final bid and move on to the next animal when a voice came from the back of the crowd. I bid $1,500. The room went completely quiet. Everyone turned around to look at the person who had just said that number. They saw an old man with white hair and a weathered face and hands that looked like they had worked with soil and animals their entire life. The old man was wearing a shirt with holes in it. His boots had mud on them. He looked like he did not have $1,500, let alone enough money to buy a worthless foal. But he was standing there, his hand raised, his eyes locked on the small brown horse in the way that people look at something that means everything to them. Margaret Chen, who owned the auction ground with her husband, walked over to the old man immediately. She knew him. She had seen him at auctions before, years ago, when he had a different expression on his face. When he had hope in his eyes instead of the hollow sadness that he carried now. She asked his name. He said his name was Thomas, just Thomas. She asked if he was sure he wanted to bid that much money on a foal that nobody else wanted. He did not answer her. He just kept looking at the horse. "Sold!" Robert called out, hitting his wooden mallet against the table. "To Thomas Whitfield for $1,500. The crowd started to move on to the next animal. The excitement was gone. A normal auction continued, but Thomas did not move. He stood in exactly the same place, staring at the small brown foal. Margaret watched him, and she saw something that made her remember why she had started working at the auction in the first place. She saw a moment that mattered. A moment that was about more than just buying and selling animals. She walked over to Thomas and asked him what was special about this particular foal. Why had he offered so much money when nobody else wanted it? Why did he care so much about an animal that looked like it had no value? Thomas turned to look at her, and his eyes were full of water. Real tears, the kind that come from deep inside a person's chest, from places where pain has been living for a long time. He said, "I do not know yet, but I need to find out." Margaret had been working at auctions for many years, and she had learned that some things do not make sense to other people. Some moments are private. Some connections between a person and an animal cannot be explained in regular words. So she did not ask more questions. Instead, she helped Thomas complete the paperwork. She helped him arrange transport for the foal to a veterinary clinic where he wanted to take it. She watched as he was led to a small pen where the foal was being kept. When Thomas got close to the foal, something happened that made Margaret stop and pay attention. The foal walked directly to Thomas. It put its head against his chest, and Thomas wrapped his arms around that small brown horse and cried in a way that made people look away because the emotion was too strong to see. Margaret went back to her office and wrote one word in her notebook about this day. She wrote the word miracle. She did not know why she wrote it. She did not know what was going to happen next. But she knew that something important had just begun, something that would change Thomas's life forever, something that had been waiting 3 years to happen. And it all started because nobody wanted a small brown foal at an auction on an ordinary Saturday morning in October.
Was not always a man who cried in the dirt at auctions. He was once somebody different. He was once somebody who people respected. He was once somebody who had a reason to wake up every morning. That was before Duchess disappeared. 37 years ago, Thomas had taken every dollar he owned and bought land in a place where the mountains looked like they touched the sky. The land was not fancy. There were no big houses or expensive buildings. There was just empty space and grass and a few old barns that needed to be fixed. Thomas did not care about fancy things. He cared about horses. He had been working with horses since he was a boy, learning from his grandfather how to train them and understand them and care for them in the way they needed. His grandfather had died when Thomas was only 22 years old, but by then, Thomas knew what his whole life would be. He would breed horses, good horses, beautiful horses, horses that other people would want because they were the best. For 40 years, Thomas worked toward that dream. He woke up before sunrise every single day. He cleaned stalls and fed horses and trained young foals to wear saddles and accept riders. He built fences and repaired barns and created pastures that were safe and good. He studied breeding lines and genetics and all the things that make a horse valuable. He saved his money and bought the best breeding stock he could find. Slowly, over decades, Whitfield's ranch became famous in the horse world. People called him when they wanted a quality horse. People trusted his judgment. People knew that any horse that came from his ranch would be healthy and strong and worth the money they paid. Thomas never got married. He never wanted to. Horses were enough. Horses were everything. The ranch was his family. The work was his purpose. This life was everything he had ever wanted. Then, 3 years ago, something changed everything. Thomas found a foal that made his heart stop in a different way. Her name was Duchess, and she was born on his ranch from 2 horses that he had spent years bringing together. She was the most beautiful quarter horse Thomas had ever seen. Her coat was the color of chestnuts in the fall. Her legs were perfect and strong. Her face had an intelligence in it that most horses did not have. When Duchess was born, Thomas held her in his arms and promised her that she would be the foundation of the greatest horses his ranch had ever produced. She would have foals. Those foals would have foals. And the world would know about Whitfield's ranch forever because of Duchess. For 12 years, Thomas raised Duchess carefully. He trained her himself. He learned her personality and her fears and her strengths. Duchess was not just a horse to him. She was proof that all his years of work had meant something. She was his greatest success. She was his future. When Duchess was finally old enough to have her first foal, Thomas carefully selected a stallion from the best breeding facility in the state. It took him months to arrange everything. It took money he had saved his whole life. He wanted everything to be perfect because Duchess was perfect, and the foal she had would be even more perfect. Duchess became pregnant, and Thomas felt happier than he had felt in years. He cleaned and prepared the birthing stall until it was the cleanest place in the world. He arranged for the best veterinarian to come and watch the birth. He read books about breeding and birth and foal care. He marked off the days on a calendar. He was ready. He was more ready for this moment than he had ever been ready for anything in his life. 3 weeks before Duchess was supposed to give birth, Thomas woke up and found the stable door open. Duchess was gone. The police said that someone had broken into his property and stolen her. They said it was probably someone who knew about horses and knew about value. They said it happened sometimes. They said they would look for her, but they warned him not to expect good results. Horse theft was a big crime, but there were so many stolen horses in the world that the police could not find them all. Thomas did not listen to that warning. He got in his truck, and he drove everywhere. He looked in every place where Duchess might be. He called every veterinarian in the state. He called other horse breeders and asked if they had seen her. He called people he barely knew. He did not sleep. He did not eat. He did not do anything except look for Duchess. After 3 weeks, the police told him that they had found no leads. After 2 months, Thomas had called every person he could think of and found nothing. After 6 months, Thomas stopped looking because there was nothing left to look for. Duchess had disappeared like a dream. She was gone. The loss broke something inside Thomas that never got fixed. He tried to continue working at the ranch, but his hands shook when he fed the other horses. He could not think about breeding anymore. He could not look at the empty stall where Duchess had lived. Other horse breeders came to ask about buying horses from his ranch, but Thomas had no energy to talk to them. His reputation started to fail because he could not take care of the animals anymore. Within a year, Thomas had sold most of his horses to other breeders. He could not afford to keep the ranch. He moved into a small house on the edge of town and took jobs as a temporary hand at other people's ranches. He would work for a day or two, helping with difficult horses or heavy labor, then leave when the work was done. Thomas stopped talking to people. He stopped smiling. He became invisible in the way that very sad people become invisible. He was still alive, but he was not really living. Every single day, for 3 years, Thomas carried a photograph of Duchess in his pocket. The photograph showed her standing in a sunny field, her brown coat shining, her eyes looking directly at the camera with that special intelligence that made her different from other horses. Thomas pulled out that photograph many times each day and just looked at it. He would talk to the photograph sometimes. He would tell Duchess that he was sorry he could not find her. He would tell her that he missed her. He would tell her that losing her had taken away the only reason he had ever had to get up in the morning. The doctor had told him that he was depressed. Friends had told him to try to move on. But Thomas could not move on because Duchess was still missing. Some part of Thomas was still missing with her. Nobody at that auction on Saturday morning knew any of this when they saw the old man with white hair. Nobody knew that they were looking at a person who had lost everything and stopped believing that anything good could ever happen again. That was the moment before he saw the foal. That was the moment before everything changed. The auction was loud and busy and full of animals and people and noise that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Thomas walked through it like he was walking through a dream. His feet moved, but he was not really paying attention to where they were going. His mind was somewhere else. His mind was always somewhere else these days. Around him, people were buying and selling. People were shouting numbers and making bids and talking about the quality of different animals. Business was happening all around him, but Thomas was not part of it. He was just moving through the space like a ghost, like he was not really there. He had come to the auction because he needed work. The auction owner sometimes had jobs available, work that required strength and experience with animals. Thomas was good at that kind of work because he could do it without thinking. He could do it without feeling. He walked past pens of cattle first. The cattle looked at him with their dark eyes, and he did not look back. He walked past young horses that people were inspecting, running their hands over their legs and checking their teeth. Those horses were clean and healthy looking. Those horses would probably sell for good prices. Thomas did not stop to look at them. Nothing in an auction interested him anymore. But then something happened that Thomas did not expect. He felt it before he saw it. It was like a rope had been tied around his chest, and something was pulling him. It was like his body knew something that his mind did not know. His feet stopped moving. His heart started beating faster. His hands started shaking in a way that he could not control. He turned to look at the pen next to him, and there it was. A small brown foal. The foal was thin. The foal was dirty. The foal looked like it had been neglected and hurt and treated poorly for a long time. The foal looked like nobody had ever taken care of it properly. The foal looked like it had given up on expecting anything good to happen to it. But the foal's eyes were looking directly at Thomas. Not at the crowd. Not at the other people walking past. Directly at Thomas. Thomas could not move. He could not breathe. He could not do anything except look back at those eyes. Something was happening inside his chest that he did not understand. Something was happening inside his body that felt like electricity running through his veins. Something was happening that felt like recognition, like coming home, like finding something he had been searching for without knowing he was searching. A woman who worked at the auction came over and asked him if he wanted information about the foal. She asked him if he was interested in bidding on it. Thomas did not hear her. He did not hear anything except a sound that was like wind moving through the empty places inside him. He walked to the fence of the pen. The foal walked to the fence too. Thomas reached his hand out slowly, the way you reach towards something you are afraid to touch, because touching it might make it disappear. The foal's head came forward and placed itself directly under his palm. The foal did this not like it was meeting a stranger, but like it was meeting someone it had known for its entire life. The foal pressed its head against Thomas's hand, like it was saying something without words. Thomas stood there with his hand on the foal's head and his breath caught in his chest and tears starting to build behind his eyes. He could not understand what was happening. He could not explain it with logic or reason. All he knew was that this small brown foal that nobody wanted meant something. This foal meant everything. Other people were walking past them, moving through the auction, doing normal auction things. But Thomas and the foal were frozen in their own moment. They were the only two things in the world that mattered. Everything else had disappeared. A memory started to push its way into Thomas's mind. A memory of a night 12 years ago when he had been waiting for a foal to be born. He had been in the barn, watching a mare named Duchess, waiting for her to deliver the baby that was supposed to be the greatest horse he would ever own. That memory felt important suddenly. That memory felt connected to this moment in a way that Thomas could not understand. He pulled his hand back from the foal's head, and his knees became so weak that he was afraid he would fall down right there at the fence. He sat down slowly in the dirt, his back against the fence, his eyes still on the foal. The foal turned to watch him. The foal did not move away. The foal stayed close, the way animals stay, close to things they care about. Margaret Shun was watching all of this from across the auction grounds. She had been working at the auction for many years, and she had learned to notice things that other people missed. She had noticed Thomas because she recognized him. She had seen him at auctions years ago when he looked different, when he looked alive, when he looked like he had a reason to be alive. She watched as this broken old man and this unwanted small foal recognized each other in a way that made no logical sense. She knew something important was happening. When the foal was brought to the sale ring, Thomas rose from the dirt and moved toward the crowd. His hands were still shaking. His mind was still confused. But something in him had woken up. Something in him that had been dead for 3 years was starting to move again. The auctioneer started calling for bids. Nobody raised their hand. The auctioneer lowered the price. Still nobody wanted the foal. Thomas's heart was breaking all over again. He could not lose this foal the way he had lost Duchess. He could not survive another loss. His body moved before his mind caught up. His hand went up into the air. $1,500, he said. The words came out loud enough for everyone to hear. The auction ground went quiet. Everyone turned to look at the old man with white hair and the dirt on his clothes and the expression on his face like he was being torn apart from inside. Everyone knew that $1,500 was a lot of money for a foal that looked like this one. Everyone knew it did not make sense. Everyone knew that something was happening that they did not understand. Thomas did not care what anyone knew or did not know. He only knew that he could not let this foal be sold to someone else. He could not let it go back to people who did not care about it. He could not survive that happening again. Sold, the auctioneer called out, to Thomas Whitfield for $1,500. Thomas walked directly to the small pen where the foal was being kept. When he got close, the foal did something that made Margaret stop what she was doing and watch with her eyes wide. The foal walked directly to Thomas and put its head against his chest. Thomas wrapped his arms around that small brown foal and began to cry. Not quiet tears, real crying. The kind of crying that comes from the deepest part of a person, from places where pain has been hiding for years. Margaret wrote one word in her notebook that day. She wrote the word why, because she knew that something impossible was happening. She knew that somehow, against all logic and reason, a broken man had found something that knew him, something that recognized him, something that had been waiting for him, and she had no idea why. Thomas did not go home after he bought the foal. He did not take the foal to his small house at the edge of town. Instead, he went to find Margaret Shun and asked her a question that made her pause and think carefully before she answered. He asked if the foal had been examined by a veterinarian. Margaret said yes, it had been checked. She said it was healthy, which was surprising for an animal that looked so thin and neglected. But then she told him something else, something that made Thomas's hands start to shake again. She told him about the microchip. Margaret explained that inside the foal's body, embedded deep in the muscles of its shoulder, was a small electronic device. A chip. She explained that nobody at the animal control facility understood what the chip was for or why it was there. She said they had tried to scan it multiple times, but the scanner would not read it. The technology was too old, they said. The scanner did not have a right frequency. Thomas asked her to show him the documentation. They went to Margaret's office, and she pulled up the file on her computer. Thomas read the words carefully. The microchip was embedded in the foal's shoulder. The location was listed exactly. The scans had been attempted multiple times. Nothing had worked. Nobody had any explanation for it. Thomas's mind started to race with possibilities that seemed impossible. A microchip did not just appear in a foal. Someone had put it there. Someone had a reason for putting it there. Someone had known something about this foal that nobody else knew. He asked Margaret if there was a veterinarian clinic nearby that might have better equipment, a clinic that specialized in unusual situations. Margaret said there was a facility about 20 minutes away. She said they had advanced scanning equipment. She said she would help him take the foal there if he wanted. Thomas wanted. By the middle of that afternoon, Thomas and the small brown foal were sitting in an examination room at a veterinary clinic called Riverside Equine Care. The room smelled like clean floors and medicine and the particular smell of a place where animals were being treated. A veterinarian named Dr. Sarah Lynn came in and asked Thomas what he needed. Thomas explained about the foal. He explained about the microchip that nobody could scan. He explained that he did not know why the chip was there, but that he needed to know. Dr. Lynn examined the foal carefully. She felt the area where the chip was supposed to be. She nodded like she could feel something under the skin. Then she went to get her scanning equipment. She came back with a machine that looked more advanced than the equipment at the animal control facility. The machine had different settings and different frequencies. Dr. Lynn positioned the scanner over the area where the chip was located and pressed a button. Nothing happened. She tried again with a different setting. Still nothing. Thomas felt something like panic starting to build in his chest. He felt like he was back at the point where he had lost Duchess. He felt like he was about to lose the only thing that had given him hope in 3 years. Dr. Lynn tried 3 more times with 3 different settings. On the 5th try, the machine beeped. A soft beep. A single beep. But it was enough. Information started to appear on the screen of the machine. Numbers. Data. Information that had been locked inside the foal's body waiting for the right machine to read it. Dr. Lynn leaned closer to the screen and her expression changed. She said, "This is unusual." Thomas could not breathe. He asked what was unusual. He asked what the chip said. Dr. Lynn said that the chip was a breeding registry marker. She said it was very old technology from a facility that had closed down many years ago. She said that the chip contained genetic information. She said that information was used to track breeding lines and maternal history. Thomas's voice came out very quiet. He asked what the genetic information said. Dr. Lynn was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked at Thomas and asked him a question instead of answering immediately. She asked him his name. He said his name was Thomas Whitfield. She asked if he was a horse breeder. He said he used to be. She nodded like that made sense. Then she said something that made the world stop moving. She said, "According to this information, the mare in this foal's maternal line is registered under your breeding license." Thomas could not understand those words. He asked her to say them again. She did, slowly and clearly, in case he had not heard correctly the first time. The genetic data in this chip indicates that this foal's mother was registered as your breeding mare. Thomas sat down in a chair because his legs could not hold him up anymore. "What is the name?" he asked. His voice sounded like it was coming from very far away. Dr. Lynn looked at the information on her screen. She said, "The name in the registry is Duchess." Thomas made a sound that was not quite a word and not quite a cry. It was the sound of something breaking inside a person. It was the sound of 3 years of pain suddenly shifting into something different. Something that felt like it might be hope, but hope was so dangerous and so scary that Thomas could not quite believe it. He asked if she was certain. Dr. Lynn said she was certain. She said the genetic markers were clear. She said the foal that was standing in this examination room was the biological offspring of a mare named Duchess, registered under the breeding license of Thomas Whitfield. Thomas stood up and walked to where the foal was standing. He put his hands on the foal's body. He ran his fingers over its coat. He looked at its face. He looked at its eyes. And suddenly, he could see Duchess in those eyes. He could see the same intelligence. He could see the same expression. He could see the piece of Duchess that had survived in this small brown foal. "Duchess had a foal," he whispered to the foal. "Your mother was Duchess. She was the most beautiful horse in the world. She was mine." The foal leaned its head against his chest, the way it had done at the auction, the way it had done every time Thomas had gotten close to it. The foal knew. Somehow, the foal knew that Thomas had known Duchess. The foal knew that Thomas had loved Duchess. Dr. Lynn gave Thomas some space. She stepped back and let him have this moment with the foal. She watched as an old man held a young horse and cried in a way that made it clear that something broken was starting to heal. After a long time, Thomas turned to Dr. Lynn and asked her if she could find out more about the foal's story. He asked her if there was a way to discover what had happened to Duchess. He asked her if anyone could tell him how a foal that was never supposed to exist had somehow come to be in his life. Dr. Lynn said there might be ways to investigate. She said she would help. What nobody in that examination room knew yet was that the investigation would lead to discoveries that were even more surprising than the microchip itself. What nobody knew was that the story of this foal was connected to a crime that nobody had solved. What nobody knew was that this small brown horse was the key to answering questions that Thomas had been asking for 3 long years. But for now, in that moment, Thomas just held his daughter. Not his daughter, but the daughter of the horse he had loved more than anything else in the world. And he finally felt like living again. Dr. Sarah Lynn was a veterinarian who had seen many difficult things in her career. She had treated horses that had been abused. She had worked with animals that had suffered from neglect and cruelty. She had dedicated her life to healing broken animals. But what she discovered about the foal's story was different. It was darker. It was more complicated. And it was the kind of truth that explained everything. Thomas sat in the examination room with the foal while Dr. Lynn made phone calls to different agencies and different people who might have information. She called the animal control officer who had brought the foal to the auction. She called the hiker who had found the foal abandoned. She called other veterinarians and investigators who specialized in horse crimes. She gathered information like she was putting together pieces of a puzzle that had been scattered for 3 years. What emerged was a story of desperation and cruelty. The man who had stolen Duchess from Thomas's ranch was named Raymond Cole. He was someone who knew the value of horses, but did not have the money or reputation to breed them legally. So he stole them instead. He had stolen Duchess because he knew she was pregnant, and he knew that a foal from a horse with her bloodline would be valuable even if he could not prove where it came from. Raymond had kept Duchess in an illegal breeding operation in a remote area about 2 hours from Thomas's ranch. The facility was not licensed. The animals were not cared for properly. There was no veterinarian on site. The horses were kept in terrible conditions and forced to breed repeatedly without rest or proper medical care. Duchess had given birth to the foal in those terrible conditions. The foal that was now standing in Dr. Lynn's examination room had been born to a mother that was being held prisoner. The microchip that Thomas had arranged to be implanted before he bred Duchess legally had been placed there years before. The chip had survived everything. It had survived the theft. It had survived the terrible breeding operation. It had carried the truth inside it, waiting for someone who could read it. After the foal was born, Raymond had moved it multiple times, trying to hide it, trying to sell it without raising questions. The foal had been passed from person to person, none of them knowing its true history, none of them caring about where it came from. Finally, it had been abandoned at a ranch when it became clear that it was not valuable enough to sell. That was when the hiker had found it and called animal control. But Duchess had not survived. The investigation found that Duchess had died during a rescue operation. An animal welfare raid on Raymond's illegal breeding facility had discovered Duchess in terrible condition. The stress of being removed from the facility, combined with the physical damage from years of improper breeding and care, had been too much for her body to survive. She had died in a transport vehicle on the way to a veterinary facility. So close. She had been saved, but too late. Thomas sat with this information for a very long time. He sat with it the way a person sits with grief. He sat with it and cried for the horse he had loved. He cried because Duchess had suffered. He cried because she had never come home. He cried because she had died being rescued instead of being rescued to live. But then he looked at the foal, and he understood something that changed everything. Duchess had not completely disappeared. She had left something behind. She had left a piece of herself in this small brown foal. She had given birth to this foal despite the terrible conditions she was being kept in. She had created life even while being destroyed. And that foal, that surviving piece of Duchess, had somehow found its way to the one person in the world who could save it. The one person in the world who would recognize it. The one person in the world who had loved its mother. Thomas made a decision in that moment. He decided that the foal would not carry the name of the terrible things that had happened to it. It would not carry the name of the illegal breeding operation or the people who had not cared for it. It would carry the name of hope. It would carry the name of the future. He named it Duchess's Hope. Hope. Thomas spent the following weeks working with investigators and law enforcement to build a case against Raymond Cole and the people who had helped him run the illegal breeding operation. Thomas testified about Duchess being stolen. He provided evidence about the breeding arrangement he had made. He helped to prove that the foal carried the genetic markers that showed it was indeed Duchess's biological offspring. Raymond Cole was arrested. He was charged with animal theft and animal cruelty. He was convicted and sent to prison. Justice, when it finally came, did not bring Duchess back. But it meant something. It meant that what happened would not happen again. It meant that Duchess's suffering was not meaningless. More importantly, it meant that Thomas had a reason to live again. He used the money that he had left, and he bought back some land. Not the full ranch, but enough. Enough to rebuild. Enough to start again. He brought hope home to the land and built a new barn. He cleaned pastures and repaired fences and started again the work that had defined his whole life. But this time it was different. Thomas worked with horse rescue organizations. He helped to find homes for horses that had been abused or neglected, the way Hope had been. He spent his time and his money helping animals that had been hurt by people like Raymond Cole. He turned his pain into purpose. Hope grew strong and beautiful. The foal's ribs stopped showing. Its coat became shiny and healthy. It grew into a young horse that had the same intelligence and grace that its mother Duchess had possessed. Looking at Hope, Thomas could see Duchess in its eyes, in its movements, in the way it moved with purpose through the world. 1 year after finding Hope at the auction, Thomas stood in a field and watched the young horse run. Margaret Shunn was there with him, visiting the ranch that had come back to life. She asked Thomas if he was happy now, if finding Hope had healed him. Thomas thought about that question carefully before he answered. He said that he would never be completely healed because losing Duchess had broken something in him that could never be fully repaired. But he said that Hope had given him something different. Hope had given him a reason to keep going. Hope had shown him that even from the worst situations, something beautiful could survive and come back to life. He said, Duchess never came home, but she sent her baby to me, and that baby saved my life. Margaret wrote in her notebook that day. She wrote the words that she had been trying to understand since the auction. She finally understood why the old man had cried in the dirt. She finally understood why an old man with no money had offered $1,500 for a foal that nobody wanted. She wrote one final word in her notebook. She wrote the word that had been true all along. She wrote, "Miracle." And as the sun set over the field where Hope was running, Thomas Whitfield stood with his hand on the fence and thanked a horse that he had lost for sending him a horse that he had found. He thanked Duchess for surviving long enough to give life to Hope. He thanked Hope for recognizing him at the auction. He thanked the universe for being strange and unexpected and full of connections that nobody could explain. And he promised that he would spend the rest of his life taking care of horses like Hope. Horses that had been broken and abandoned and forgotten. Horses that had nowhere else to go. Horses that needed someone who understood that even the smallest, most overlooked creatures could carry miracles inside them, waiting for the right person to find them.